Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into a pretty intense historical account today. We'll be looking at what happens when a sudden, devastating loss of leadership creates this incredibly volatile power vacuum. We're talking about a situation that nearly causes a rising leader to make a catastrophic, legacy-destroying mistake. It's a real-life story of high-stakes diplomacy, unchecked rage, and the incredible power of a single voice of reason, drawn directly from the historical accounts of ancient Israel. Honestly, it's a masterclass in conflict resolution. So let's dive into this by asking a foundational question. What happens when a stabilizing figure just vanishes from the scene, leaving a rising leader completely untethered? When the person who grounds you, the one who advises you and checks your worst impulses, is suddenly gone, how do you react under pressure? Because this is the exact psychological state we find our main figure, David, in as our source material begins. Our source text kicks off with a massive inciting incident. The prophet Samuel dies. Now, Samuel wasn't just a leader. He was the moral and spiritual anchor of the entire nation of Israel. His death plunges everyone into deep mourning. But for David, it is acutely personal. He's lost his protector, he's lost his guide. Feeling vulnerable and, honestly, probably a bit reckless, David takes off and retreats deep into the harsh, unforgiving wilderness of Paran. The anchor is gone, and this ship is officially loose in the storm. Out in this rugged wilderness region of Carmel, David bumps into two absolutely contrasting figures. On one side, you have Nabal. The text literally describes him as churlish and evil in his doings. He's harsh, he's stubborn, and he belongs to the house of Caleb. On the exact opposite end of the spectrum is his wife, Abigail. She's described as a woman of good understanding and of a beautiful countenance. So you've got this deeply flawed, abrasive guy paired with an incredibly wise and perceptive woman. Talk about an extreme mismatch, right? To really grasp the scale of the impending conflict here, you've got to look at Nabal's wealth. He is a very great man in terms of possessions. We're talking a massive fortune, including a flock of 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And out in the wilderness, David and his men had actually been protecting this massive investment. Nabal's own servants even admit later on that David's men were like a protective wall to them, both by night and day, making sure not a single sheep went missing while they were out in the fields. Well, since it's now the festive time of sheep shearing, David acts essentially as a diplomatic envoy. He sends 10 young men up to Carmel to greet Nabal, and they follow a very specific 3-step protocol. First, they arrive peacefully. Second, they pronounce a vast blessing of peace upon Nabal, his house, and everything he owns. And third, they politely request a goodwill payment, a tribute, basically, in exchange for the protection they freely provided to Nabal's shepherds all season long. In the ancient world, this was a totally standard, respectful request for compensation. But Nabal? He completely blows it up. He violently rejects the diplomacy. And he doesn't just say no. He hurls a deeply personal insult, saying, "Who is David and who is the son of Jesse?" He literally pretends not to know the most famous warrior in the land, totally dismissing him as just another runaway servant breaking away from his master. He absolutely refuses to share his bread, water, or meat with men he claims he doesn't even know. It's a massive slap in the face. And, without Samuel's calm guidance around to temper him, David's immediate reaction to this insult is unchecked, blinding rage. He doesn't negotiate. He doesn't even pause. He just tells his men, "Gird on every man his sword." David mobilizes a private army, 400 heavily armed men. And their objective? To completely wipe out Nabal and every single male in his household before morning light. That power vacuum left by Samuel's death, it just became incredibly dangerous. Meanwhile, back at the estate, one of Nabal's young servants realizes the impending doom and wisely bypasses Nabal entirely, running straight to Abigail. The servant warns her that evil is determined against their master and the whole household. This instantly sets up the massive stakes of our story. If Abigail doesn't intercept a furious, heavily armed David right now, he is going to shed innocent blood. He'll permanently taint his legacy, completely ruining his moral high ground before he ever even steps into his destined role as ruler. And this brilliantly illustrates Abigail's masterful de-escalation skills. She doesn't panic. She doesn't even bother arguing with her foolish husband. She just takes immediate action, quietly launching a massive mobilization of resources. 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 fully prepared sheep, parched corn, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs. She loads this absolute feast onto donkeys and sends her servants ahead of her. And get this, she keeps this entire, massive catering operation a complete secret from her drunk and oblivious husband. As she's riding her donkey down the hill, she is literally on a collision course with a highly trained militia. The tension is incredibly high. Will David cross the line and shed causeless blood out of pure, unchecked spite? What happens next is a dramatic turning point. The very second Abigail sees David, she hurries off her donkey, falls on her face before him, and bows completely to the ground. She instantly absorbs the blame, saying, "Upon me, my lord, upon me let this iniquity be." She begs David to just completely ignore Nabal, who she frankly admits is exactly what his name means, a fool. She physically places herself right between David's wrath and her doomed household, offering up that massive tribute. You really have to notice the sheer brilliance of Abigail's rhetorical argument here. She doesn't just ask for mercy, she reframes the entire situation. She tells David that it's actually God who has sent her to withhold him from shedding blood and avenging himself with his own hand. She reminds David of his greater purpose, that he fights the battles of the Lord, that he's destined for a sure house, and that he absolutely must not carry the grief and offense of petty, causeless vengeance into his future leadership. The wisdom of her words just cuts right through David's anger. It's like cold water to the face. David suddenly realizes the scale of the catastrophe he was about to commit. He immediately blesses her, he blesses her advice, and praises the God of Israel for sending her to meet him that day. He openly admits that if she hadn't hurried to intercept him, Nabal's household would have been totally destroyed by morning. So he accepts her peace offering and tells her to go up in peace. Diplomacy actually wins. And then we get this stark, almost cinematic moment of dramatic irony. Out in the dark, David is turning his 400 armed men around, his rage completely extinguished by wise counsel. Meanwhile, Abigail returns home to find Nabal holding a massive feast in his house, completely oblivious to his near annihilation. The text notes he is feasting like a king, and his heart is merry because he's incredibly drunk. Because of his state, Abigail wisely decides to tell him absolutely nothing about what just happened until the morning light. The aftermath for Nabal unfolds pretty rapidly. At night, he's oblivious, just caught up in a drunken feast. But in the morning, when the wine has worn off, Abigail finally tells him the truth of how close he came to a violent end. The shock is utterly overwhelming. The source material states that his heart died within him and he became as a stone. He enters what appears to be this paralytic state, and about 10 days later, he dies. When David hears the news of Nabal's death out in the wilderness, he realizes that the situation resolved itself without him having to compromise his integrity or resort to his own violence. The power dynamic shifts dramatically. Recognizing her incredible intellect, grace, and diplomatic skill, David sends his messengers back to Carmel to ask Abigail to become his wife. She humbles herself once again, hastily riding out with 5 of her maids to join David. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Think back to the beginning, to the death of Samuel and the reckless grief it triggered in David, colliding with the incredibly foolish pride of Nabal. How easily could the course of history and a leader's entire legacy be permanently destroyed by unchecked emotion? And more importantly, how radically can that trajectory be saved by a single, courageous, and well-timed voice of reason? Thank you so much for exploring this remarkable history with us today. It's just a profound reminder of the enduring power of diplomacy.